Welcome to NewYorkBIOs Virtual Breakfast Series, a digital program started in 2020, bringing you fireside chats with leaders across the healthcare spectrum. This week's episode features Adam Goulburn and Zavain, both founders and managing partners of Dimension.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Jennifer Hawks-Bland, the CEO at NewYorkBIO, and we are very excited you're here for another edition of our virtual breakfast. I know some of you missed us last week. We were in Albany with a whole host of people doing some lobbying on behalf of the life sciences industry at the state capitol. So that was always interesting, but definitely good to be back in person. So this week we are here talking about startups, finance, life science, computer science. I think we'll just cover the waterfront about all the different topics we can cover. We're excited to have Adam and Zavain here with us. As always, I almost always forget housekeeping. Please remember, if you have questions during the course of our conversation, put them in the chat or the Q&A, and Derek and I will get to them throughout the process. With that, I'll turn it over to Derek to kick us off. Thanks.
All right. Good morning, gentlemen. It's wonderful to have you here. I think one of the things that we really like on this program is talking about things that are greatly involved in the upswing of New York City bioscience. And I'm excited about today because I think one of the big things that's impacted the ecosystem is the entrance of new capital and kind of a new outlook on kind of what does it mean to start a biotech company? What are the fields that are available to people? And you guys encapsulate all of that. So there's a million different places we can go. We tend to start with a bit of an origin story. And Adam, I've known you for ages, and Zavain, we've just met. So why don't we let you go first this morning?
Sure. Maybe origin on myself and then weave it into meeting Adam, and Adam can take it into the genesis of Dimension. Trained as a computer scientist, studied undergrad in kind of math, computer science, and Adam won't let me forget philosophy for undergrad and graduate studies at Stanford. In the Valley, circa 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, really when the term quote unquote big data, which is now out of favor, but really when that term kind of first came,
I think it's still in favor with IBM.
It's still in favor.
If they're selling it, it's in favor.
That's exactly right. But directly after school, cut my teeth as a software engineer, as an entrepreneur. Was in and around a number of startups, mainly on the software side and not really at all touching the life sciences or biotech and biology. Derek, I think you mentioned over email maybe late last week, a stint I had advising first the Rockets and then the 76ers on machine learning and kind of data strategy. I would joke to Adam and Nan, my two co-founders, Adam, we have here, it's probably the closest I'll ever be to being in the adult equivalent of Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. But really kind of a fun foray and a chance for me at in my 20s to really see an industry very rapidly turn over from the mass and rapid digitization of the fundamental primitives and then the acceptance of data science as a tool to kind of drive analysis and decision making. I think in many ways, and we don't need to go too much into a rabbit hole here, but for basketball, if you look at how the game is played today, it's entirely different than even just how the game was played 10 years ago. And that's largely driven by the digitization and then kind of the acceptance of novel methodological approaches, including machine learning and data science, and driving kind of analysis and decision-making.
So let me ask you, just because this is probably the only place that basketball and Moneyball and Garable, like all of this stuff is going to fit. So when you were there, so you literally did Moneyball with Daryl Morey, right? So, what is the spread between, say, I would imagine the 76ers are probably ahead of most of the other teams and things like that, but what do you think the spread is between Team 1 and Team 32 in terms of how they use data and how far ahead what kind of team you got to actually play on?
Well, less so. Sam Hinkie is a close friend, a mentor, and actually a partner of ours in Dimension, and he was kind of the first guy who really took me on as a mentor and pulled me along. He briefly tried to convince me to move to Philly full time, and that's right when I first entered venture. So I had a brief kind of existential career angst, but then decided to stick.
Did he use trust the process in his pitch?
He made one of the most compelling pitches to stay in venture by accident. I remember I was chatting with him over coffee, and I mean, at this point, I was maybe 23, 24 years old. Sam was had just kind of taken on the role as GM of the 76ers. And in my mind, he was the absolute icon. I was just really stoked to be sitting next to him for coffee. And I asked him a little bit facetiously what his main career regrets were.
Mhm.
And he didn't skip a beat, but kind of looked at me dead in the eyes and said, sports is zero sum. So you'll always make your team better. You can, but your team's win will come at your opponent's loss. And he then referenced his friends from the TSB and from consulting days in the Valley, where it really felt like everything that they were doing was positive sum. And so that stuck with me, and that actually convinced me not to go into the league and to instead stay in kind of entrepreneurship and tech and the Valley.
I think for those that are joining right now, must be doing a double take, by the way, which is like we're talking about basketball. They're trying to get how high you are, how tall you are, whether you're a player.
Like, actually 6'7", so it's like, you can't tell it on Zoom here.
Zoom is very distorting.
Every once in a while, you just have to mix it up. I mean, Kevin Durant's going to join us later. We're going to talk spacing. We're going to talk about all these things.
Oh, I love that. I will say, and we don't need to go on this for too long, but the one, at least at that time, Derek, to your question, there was a widespread between the teams who were sophisticated with data and the teams who weren't. And within the realm of sports, the learning kind of cycle time of iteration is 1 year. It's one season. And so I think sports teams very quickly adopted. And now, the first team to the 31st or 28th, whatever number of teams there are now, they're all pretty progressive, and it's closer to kind of the sort of analysis, and then also cloaked veils of secrecy that you might see in public equities and hedge funds, in terms of how they operate, because one team's advantage is really an advantage for a moment in time, but by the next season it's largely dissipated or arbitraged away. Different than biotech and life sciences, where the learning cycle really is, the 7, 8, 9, 10 years to discover and take something through the clinic. And so I actually think in biotech and life sciences and pharma, you still have a very widespread of folks who are, mature and sophisticated with respect to data and automation and machine learning and so on and so forth. And then the folks who have maybe, been a little bit more Luddite, but we'll get there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the learning cycle might be that long, but the change cycle is faster, right? You have to make a lot of changes. You have to make a lot of changes based on the fact that you don't know it yet, right?
Yes.
You can basically make the AI investment in recursion, and the investment cycle is going to turn over 3 times before you figure out what the heck they're going to put into the clinic and whether it's going to do anything.
I'm glad we're moving off of basketball, so I don't have to tell Derek.
I was going to get there. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay.
My Michael Jordan story. No. I'll tell that offline. I can't embarrass myself in front of all the New York Bio ecosystem. It involves me having a conversation with him and not knowing it was him.
Amazing.
Wow. He'd probably love that. Zav, Zav, why don't you roll through for the next 30 seconds on kind of like.
I ultimately wound my way into venture, first at Innovation Endeavors, which at that point was essentially Eric Schmidt's family office. He was transitioning away from chairman and CEO of Google, Alphabet, very much into what he is today, global tech evangelist. And he was using his own balance sheet capital from his family office to make small seed and Series A investments in tech and the life sciences, really as a flashlight, I think, to see kind of what sciences and technologies were coming down the pike. That's where I met our third co-founder, Nan Lee, who's based in San Francisco, so we didn't torture him with a 6 a.m. Call here. But Nan and I became very good friends. We were roommates in San Francisco and Oakland for a number of years. We taught at Stanford a course on venture investing for 4 years. And then ultimately I met Adam Goulburn at JP Morgan 2014. The place where most best friends and life partners end up meeting. And I'll say a quick kind of tease into Adam's story, which is that I met him maybe a few hours before he met his now wife. So within the span of one evening, he met.
Oh wow!
Ended up meeting his work
partner. Very, very productive. JP That's
Morgan. A good day in the Adam Goulburn history, right there.
Everything's been downhill since then for me and JP Morgan Healthcare Conference.
You're never going to top that.
Yeah.
Take it away, Adam.
Yeah, so I think Zav had a unique insight and talent in venture, and ended up, still to this day, I say it's the best deal I've ever done, poaching Zav over from innovation, coming over to Lux. And so for the last 8 and a bit years, we worked together. My background was, I actually vividly remember walking around the halls of Weill Cornell in New York, here in the city, calling Derek, because I don't think Zoom wasn't around, video wasn't a thing back.
Zoom didn't, yeah.
But like begging and asking for advice, and Derek, you were super helpful to me and always have been in terms of connecting me to people in the industry. So, and especially in the New York ecosystem. So kudos. But yeah, so I was doing a postdoc there in stem cell research and regenerative medicine, originally from Australia, where I have a PhD in the same field of cell biology. And before that, a dual degree in business and in biotech, but ultimately never wanted to be an academic. So I loved the science and fell in love with the biology, but always wanted to be at this interface between innovation and venture creation and company building. And that's why I ended up coming to New York. I was a little bit selfish. New York's the best city in the world, but back in 2010, the kind of the kind of venture ecosystem, let alone the biotech life science venture ecosystem, was kind of, I'd say, I remember very clearly a Nature Biotech sort of article talking about New York City being the next kind of hub of biotech, and it's still sort of progressing, albeit slowly, but these things take time. So yeah, so I spent 11 years at Lux, worked my way all the way up from a summer associate to a general partner, and ultimately with Zav and Nan last year, decided to take the entrepreneurial leap and become founders ourselves. And I mean, that in itself could be an hour-long conversation. We're having an absolute blast. We've learned a ton of things in the last 12 months. And we with Dimension, we raised a new fund. We closed that last year. It's a $350 million fund. We'll talk more about where our focus is, but it really is on the digitization of life sciences, where you need two people or a team of people that are multilingual or speak the many languages of founders: computer science, biology, life sciences, chemistry, technology. And so it's no coincidence. It's kind of a design DNA and foundation of our firm that you're sitting here talking to a computer scientist and a cell biologist.
Yeah.
So fire away, Derek. Fire away, Jennifer. What
I know. So, and apologies. I actually think I do a decent job as a recovering litigator. I do try not to depose our guests.
Good practice. It would be good practice. Go for it.
Yeah, let's hope you're not on the other end of a deposition anytime soon. We'll say. True. So what made you, so clearly, like, you were both in very successful firms, you were doing well by, all of that thing. What made you decide to take the leap to become entrepreneurs yourself?
Yeah, I'll go first, Zab, and then let's alternate. I'll go first with this one. You go first with the next one.
Perfect. Yeah.
And you should weigh in on this, obviously, but we've been asked that question a lot, and our common answer is, like, it was less running away from something and more running towards something. And we'll talk about the opportunity today and how we view it. We think the intersection interface of technology and life sciences is the largest opportunity in venture today. And there comes a specific moment in time where industries are transformed, and value is captured by those that are sector focused lighthouse firms. And we can give you examples, whether it's Emergence for SaaS, or Kirsten Green for DTC, direct to consumer, or whether it's Mickey Malter and the team at Ribbit with FinTech, Mike and Sunil at Amplify and that team over there with DevOps, and Matt and Fred, who are also friends of ours at Paradigm for crypto. There are these moments in time where you need to meet the entrepreneurs where they are. And we can talk about how we view, the current ecosystem and this cohort of entrepreneurs. And there are some, that are on this call. I see Colin Malone, who I've, started companies with, and Terrence from Valence, who are amazing entrepreneurs. And it'd be interesting to ask them, but I don't think they feel at home necessarily with, the traditional life science firms, and they feel a little bit lost, or, the investors in the traditional kind of technology broad firms feel a little bit distracted. So, we really want to build a product and a firm and a home that is native to those entrepreneurs. You can tell that I've been speaking to a lot of LPs, by the way, by saying product there. Anyway, why don't you weigh in, Zav?
Not Adam and I are all first-gen immigrants. None of us really come from any sort of meaningful family money in any way or capacity. All of us are very competitive. I think Nana and Adam are amongst the two most competitive people I know, and I'm certainly amongst the most competitive people I know. And frankly, we walked away from a lot in leaving Obvious and Lux and taking a huge risk. But I think we all had independent, bottoms up confidence and deductions that this, as Adam said, was the largest opportunity in the space, and that nobody was doing it well. Not only was nobody doing it well, but if we didn't do it, somebody else might meander into it and do it a disservice and delay kind of, what can be possible or what's imminently possible by appropriately building and interstitching these interdisciplinary companies. And so I think we left to not only accelerate that future, but also to go create what our ambition is a firm that will outlast the three of us, a firm that will be the last job any of the three of us ever have, and a firm that will be amongst the best investment firms on the planet. And there's a lot of hubris there. We literally just launched, about a month ago. But that's the kind of desire and the appetite that we kind of viewed the opportunity from.
So I want to talk about the first conversation where one of you brought up, hey, maybe we should start something new, right? Because if to set the stage here, you have this dichotomy of, tech firms that had started into life sciences, but for a while they're like, FDA, like, no, we're not going to touch that. Right. And then you had the biotech firms that would kind of dip their toe into the tech waters, but, God forbid it ended up in something other than a therapeutic. Right. So you have this rift in the middle where, like you said, there's a lot of founders that kind of didn't have a home to go to. Right. You had to kind of give up something to go to either side. So at what point, who kind of came up with the idea first, not from a credit perspective, but how did like the first conversation go? Because you were both, you're successful within this good firm environment. It's not like you were in a bad firm or anything. Lux has been hitting home runs. They're great. You have wonderful people at that firm, right? What did the first conversation go like?
And so is Obvious, by the way. Obvious is an amazing firm, and
yeah,
I think this wasn't a one first conversation thing. Like we should let people know that Zav and Nan have known, the three of us have known each other for a decade plus. So this has been a sculpting and chiseling of kind of theses and philosophies and where we want to be in 20, 30 years time. And what we found was we were, investing more and more of our time at Obvious and Lux at this intersection. And there comes a moment in time where the discourse and kind of intellectual debates at a partnership where, there's distinct, and differentiated interests, as you have broader multi-stage, platforms that our prior firms were, where you feel like you need something more, right? So
right.
It wasn't a one specific, conversation. And I think that resonated, by the way, with, our partners that had the conviction in us to give us their, hard-earned dollars that we're really proud of, some of the foundations and, and endowments and, and pension funds that, and some institutions that we're working for. But I think, Zav can talk to the breadcrumbs that we kind of like allude to in where we've spoken in the past in the industry. And so it wasn't just the entrepreneurs. That's a very, very large piece of it. But there are all these other breadcrumbs that speak to like this being the specific moment in time.
I think there's also, I don't know how many by title GPs there are in industry who came in as associates, principals, partners, so on and so forth, and have been promoted to near the top or at the top of these venture firms who
very few
who caught lightning in a bottle with NFTs or VR or any kind of bubble from the last 10 years. And I think you often in venture there's a lag between kind of hype and promotion and actually returning capital to your investors and kind of proving to yourself that you are a good investor. And that really does take, again, it's kind of the same iteration and learning cycle as discovering and developing a drug. It takes 7 to 10 years. And so, we were all just about at that moment in time in our careers where I think we had kind of the conviction, confidence, soup to nuts that we could do this from, from investment all the way through kind of stewardship of a company through public innings.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that just takes time. That lined up perfectly, as Adam mentioned, with all of the breadcrumbs, not only kind of viewing the investment kind of landscape from the eyes of our entrepreneurs who would have a little bit of that rock and hard place kind of experience between the life science firms and the technology firms, but then also just the broader kind of breadcrumbs in industry. And it's, maybe the tip of the spear of that is something like AlphaFold with DeepMind.
Mm-hmm.
But behind that, just one layer kind of behind that, if you go to Meta AI right here in New York, they're doing some of the most interesting kind of metagenomic proteomic work, leveraging, kind of high throughput and large scale computing. If you go to DE Shaw research right here, that technology was the genesis of Schrodinger almost 3 decades ago now.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to OpenAI or Microsoft Research, any of them, and all of them are one by one unilaterally building their own wet bench capabilities. And those computer scientists are speaking in the languages of chemistry and biology. Conversely, if you go to the Broad, Yale, Stanford, Harvard, so on and so forth, any of the leading molecular labs, academic labs on the planet today, they're all programming in TensorFlow. They're all writing, distributed, machine learning code across large reams of data in a way that maybe 5 years ago would have been a little bit surprising, and 10 years ago was absolutely null. And so at the two poles, the leading practitioners, whether they're computer scientists or life scientists, they are multilingual, and capital markets just hadn't caught up. So the opportunity, and to use kind of Adam's vernacular, was to build a product that actually mirrored the reality of the practice. And so that was the kind of genesis of Dimension.
So how did so at some point you have to go talk to some LPs and raise some money, right? So what was the kind of initial reception like, and really what was that learning curve like? I don't know if you guys had been involved in, intimately involved in raising, the latest and greatest, larger Lux fund or anything like that, but what was it like when you guys were, under your own banner, or even thinking about being under your own banner and kind of testing those waters?
I'd say, like, we often say that, well, it's true, we left with nothing, right? Like we made this decision and we wanted to go and, build this firm. And when I say nothing, it was, we didn't have an anchor LP. We had an outline of how we viewed the world, but in terms of collateral or conversation, like nothing, right? And so one of the things Nan did, our third co-founder and brother in arms, he moved his entire family over to New York and spent 6 weeks over here, and we just spent day in, day out, and nights putting together our thesis and our collateral, and then come May we started having conversations. So we certainly, LPs certainly track partners and investors in firms, whether they're existing LPs in the firm like Obvious and Lux, or whether they're not, right? And so those are sort of relationships that you have. I think both Obvious and Lux have dedicated teams that are brilliant at at fundraising and are excellent at their job, and so we certainly would walk in and whenever they needed us and share a thesis on how we're thinking about certain spaces or ecosystems or specific companies. But I think one of the things that we enjoyed in this process was getting that full, complete picture of how that side of the world really does view things. And there were a lot of headwinds when we went out to raise a fund. There was geopolitical issues, let's say, in Europe. We're still a thing. Inflation was starting to become the topic du jour and the buzzword. But I think that the in my view, and Zav might have a different view, but one of the strongest headwinds we had was kind of the foundational makeup of the LP ecosystem at that time, right? A lot of LPs were over allocated in venture, because of the cycles and the quick cycles that were happening through the go-go years of 2019, 2020, and 2021. Were both over allocated, had much of their book, too much of their book in venture, and that was one of our strongest headwinds. So we had a heap of conversations where they were really excited about what we were building, but ultimately didn't have dollars to put to work, just like, entrepreneurs have heard from venture investors.
I think one of the most interesting kind of anecdotes that we can share here, maybe without saying names, is, we had one of the leading CIOs of, likely the most credentialed and established university endowment on the planet, say to us that they don't lose sleep on, on not accessing a 2 to 3x, Cambridge biotech fund. But they'll lose sleep about missing Excel or Benchmark or Sequoia, the firms on Sandhill. And so there was also this realization that over the last 2 or 3 decades, the large tsunami-like returns from our peers on the pure play tech side had attracted capital in a way that was ultimately, as Adam mentioned, zero sum with respect to the capital that was accessing biotech and the life sciences. And so I think we realized, we had a moment, I think, halfway through the fundraising process where we realized that really the life sciences and biotech on the private side is way more cottage than even we had expected. And then if you look at the names, there's maybe 12 to 15 early stage players on the private side today. All of them have been around for more than 1.5 to 2 decades. And all of whom I hope they're around in 15 or another 20 years, but TBD, and there's a big question mark. And so venture as the tip of the spear for biotech really has been a dwindling category. It's even more cottage than any other kind of venture subclass.
Oh, absolutely.
And
if you think about it, it's also it's interesting. The types of deals that are done by venture creation firms in so many ways predicate the types of deals that are done by Series B, Series C firms, right? You basically, once you're kind of down and into that path, there's a whole different set of capital that flows, as opposed to if you don't go that path, where that nobody talks about this, but in so many ways those doors are shut, right? If you don't get into one of those 15 doors, a lot of other doors get shut as you're fundraising.
And then if from Series B to mezzanine or crossover, if you don't get 1 or 2 or 3 of the large long onlys, then you're kind of in a very scary spot in your public lifetime.
Right.
And Zav, I think this is a public where Chris has spoken about it. But Chris at Recursion, essentially one term sheet for every round that that was raised, right? In terms of, and we're obviously very large believers in Recursion. Zav is still on the board. There's a long way to play out there, but you're right. There's this sort of connective tissue that exists, and it exists for a reason, by the way. Like, some of the folks in Cambridge in the Bay Area, like, we have an enormous amount of respect for, we'll collaborate with. We're already in conversations with them, as they start thinking more and more about, how they're building out their portfolio and moving some of their portfolio into, where we overlap, which is in that, those Recursions, the Icons, the In-Citros, the Invettors, the Exscientias of the world. So, we just, the other side of the coin and what's being built from an infrastructure and an architecture standpoint, which is, yes, one of those is downstream capital. That's changing. And we have a lot of connective tissue there. And I think one of the exciting things that Zav would like to say, would usually say, is we get to write those playbooks as well, right? About these new companies and how they get funded, what their milestones are, their KPIs, their metrics, how they build their organizations, from a workforce standpoint and from a technological standpoint. So that is all yet to be written. And Dimension wants to play a very, very large role in sort of building those frameworks.
Yeah. So let's keep going there. So we've actually posted the open letter that you wrote to founders from Dimension, right? And let's actually stay here for a little bit. So what are some of the things that you wanted to do a little differently, and what is kind of the top 3 things you want to tell entrepreneurs in the field about the way that you want to operate?
Top 3.
You want me to go? You want me to go? I think while you think about that, I think what's helpful is like kind of setting the table for like where we invest and what we do and how we operate. So we're a bi-coastal firm. We're an early stage firm. We're a $350 million fund. We aim to be first institutional dollars into companies. So Seed and Series A is bread and butter. We'll incubate companies from scratch, and we can put a pin in that because I know, Derek, you'll want to ask questions about that.
Yes.
But I also, as we think about magnitude of outcome and returning the fund on each of our investments, we have the ability to flex up into growth investments. So, whether it's through the fund or, the capital that we have that are partnered with us. So while we're canonically early stage, concentrated 18 to 24 companies, we have the ability to flex up and write larger checks and do it at later stage rounds. The bookends of where we invest, which we think is unique in its focus, and as a firm, is new medicine start to finish. So at the center of our universe will be these next generation biotech companies and biotech platforms. Those are biotech platforms that are created and started with a biologist, a chemist, and a computer scientist, right? Where the platform, and data generation is really a competitive moat and barrier, and then opens up, that company to many more paths of partnership and revenue line items, to be honest. And we can go put a pin in that as well. So we will take FDA risk and do drug discovery, drug development. And then, we also will invest in the tools, technologies, instruments, and software upstream that power those drug discovery teams.
Yeah.
And then downstream, as you think about the architecture and infrastructure that's being built towards kind of personalized medicine, the kind of march towards personalized medicine is through technology. And so if you think about next generation clinical trials, manufacturing, all these new modalities that are coming online, efficiency, reducing the cost there, and then ultimately commercialization. So as you think about where dimension 1, dimension 2, dimension 3 portfolio ends up, it's going to be a balance of software and technology and drug discovery, and tech-enabled services and robotics companies and ML, layer architecture infrastructure companies, which is a very different portfolio. And we like that for a whole host of reasons, where, our partners of our companies are the Genentech, Roche, Novartis, and Pfizer, but also the Googles, the Microsofts, and the Amazons of the world, and the Thermos, and the, and the Danahers. So, that would be one, that's I think completely unique and different to what's out there. I don't know, Zav, what else, for Derek?
Adam tends to be more literal, whereas maybe I'm a little bit more
philosophical
or poetic.
It's almost like he majored in that.
we wanted a message that was both authentic to who we were, but then also resonated and inspired entrepreneurs, a fraction of whom we'll be fortunate to partner with, in Dimension's lifetime. But the intent was to kind of say, here's who we are and what we believe, and here's our very much so founder-centric view of the world. Less so kind of venture investors taking over, a majority stake at the earliest innings and then driving the scientific innovators and technologists and inventors out of the company. It's very much so kind of the model on its head. And then also allow and give space for entrepreneurs to dream big. And I think, again, for so long, this subclass of venture has really, because it's frankly very, very hard, has swung for singles and doubles, maybe a triple here or there, maybe you steal a base, but it's really, being allowed to dream big and think about what home runs and grand slams in this ecosystem look like, has been met more so with scoffs and ridicules than kind of any sort of encouragement. And we wanted to give entrepreneurs a space to both dream big and also to mirror to them that, hey, we dream big too. And we really do think we're on the precipice of creating this new ilk of company that will have increasing economies of scale in biotech and the life sciences. And historically, that's just never been the case. So that was, when at least I think about the launch and the letter, that was the intent. Obviously, it had to get then crystallized into what exactly Adam said, which is how does that actually manifest, or how does that kind of become an investment strategy?
The philosopher and the scientist.
Yeah, really.
Right.
You knew that would come in handy one day.
Black and white. Big vision answer.
Yeah.
So we actually had a question from the audience that I think fits in, and I'm going to slightly change it a little bit. So the question is, what one experience on the operational side at Dimension has fundamentally reshaped how you look at investments? I think you've talked about how you're looking at investments differently with Dimension, right? So give us an experience on your operational side, maybe historically, that caused you to change, to flip it on its head as far as an approach.
Zav?
What made you think this was the right way to look at things going forward?
I mean, you could take that probably in many different sort of paths. So I think I'm answering this question. I think for us, it was really the voice of the entrepreneur. It was, you know, like you're sitting in rooms and you're talking to, you know, CEOs, CSOs, and CTOs, and that, like, that's just an existence that's never really existed before. So I think, you know, we have to, I've said this a couple of times, meet the entrepreneurs where they are. I think from an operationalizing standpoint, you know, from us and how we operate and how we intend to, how we tend to kind of put that forward. And this is one of our challenges, is like how we think about scaling this as a firm. But, you know, the other day, the three of us, you know, the three partners, a computer scientist, a stem cell biologist, and Nan is also a product and computer scientist math major, you know, got on a plane and spent an entire day with a really interesting company in the longevity space. And so, you know, we tend to roll as three, and you get all three partners versus a single, you know, a single partner, and that makes the discussion really I think more productive. I don't know if I'm answering the question, Jennifer.
No, I was gonna say, like, it's almost easier. It's much easier to find the opposite, where we were in this fortunate position to have, again, over the last decade, between the three of us collectively, have invested and really kind of intimately been associated with 60 plus startups.
Yeah.
And so from that, we saw, and we each developed our own instinct in terms of what the best kind of investor relations look like, in terms of what the best board governance looked like, in terms of what the best management teams looked like, and how they communicated and led. And I think that really informed both how we fundraised for Dimension One, but then also how we manage the company today. And so I've caught myself a few times having, blind spots that I've appropriately spotted in entrepreneurs whose boards I sit on over the last years. But sometimes it takes a little bit of a moment where you step back and have a mirror and acknowledge that in yourself now as kind of one of the founders of a company. But being in that position where you've been able to see others do it and come at them and have open and honest conversations, I think is really informative for how we then build and manage ourselves.
Right. You realize too how easy it is when you're in the trenches to not stop and look up, right? And to sort of step back and take a little,
Absolutely.
Very true.
We have another good one here, and it says, the old school view is that biology is too complicated for AI and machine learning, right? But so the place that this question goes is, are there areas that remain too complicated, or, and here's where you guys come in, are we actually getting to the point from either new data sources or new tools that you can actually meaningfully apply this, right? I mean, the big challenge with biology has always been like, well, you can apply it to the data that you have, but if the data only covers a fraction of whatever the heck is happening biologically, you're still not in a great place, right? And I think back to, probably about a decade ago or so, where the prevailing wisdom on the PD-1 inhibitors is that they took the brakes off of CD8 T cells, and then we realized that they do a lot more things to a lot of other cells that we didn't even know what they were at the time. So biology keeps kind of turning over cards that we don't necessarily know what they are. So how do you think about this challenge now, right? What's biology going to turn over next, and how good do we have to be from an AI or ML standpoint to make it matter?
I've got four quick comments to that, and hopefully I can.
Four, okay.
And then Zav can weigh in on kind of like the specific moment in time. But and I'll go through these quickly. But like, I don't know who that asked that question. It's a great question. Like, I don't know whether Zav. It feels like it's a question we love, and it's a sort of softball question to us because it's a contrarian view that we have. But like, biology is the most complex, beautiful machine that's ever been created. And so our view is the human hubris to think that we can understand it without the aid of technology, right? And so the last 60 years or whatever it is in biotech has been done essentially with technology in the Middle Ages, right? And it's now entering this new era. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, this is not us saying that you can press a button and discover a new technology on a computer. That is well and truly, many, decades, if not centuries out. And what we're saying is there's this symbiotic relationship between technology teams, computer science teams, and chemists and biology and drug discovery teams that have to work and do this in tandem. And every company that we've invested in has that dual, workforce that are integrated, Recursion, Invetter, the list goes on. I think the third comment is, we're at a very specific moment in time where we view the modern biotech lab as being the largest productive data, like the largest productive data unit or engine, on the planet. And that is very, very, very powerful. We're talking about, some companies, petabytes of data a week and soon to be petabytes of data a day. That's more data than, kind of the Twitters of the world that are out there. And, we could have a long debate as to the use and the quality of that data. My view and our view is that data is really, really useful and really, really interesting, and data that's never been created before and generates really unique biological insights. And that gets to bullet number 4, and it's a miracle that I remembered it. But you're right, like the textbooks are going to be rewritten. We sat down with Roger Perlmutter and Freddie Bowie from Icon the other day for dinner, and it was a company I was fortunate enough to be involved in, at Lux, and I think they're building, like Recursion, an enormous company. It's going to take time, but their insights through their technology, which is essentially looking at biology live because they've built these proprietary microscopes, is rewriting how molecular mechanisms happen within the cell, because you're able to look at it at microseconds, not on, live, not in still life or still or frozen fixed cells. So, it's a very exciting time, and it's not going to be a flick of the switch. It's going to be a multi-decade journey. But anyways, I'll shut up there.
Like
Before
that,
you even go, I'm just really happy that you didn't say biology is just code. I would have really had to fight the urge to hang up on you and stop the webinar if you did that.
But one of the breadcrumbs that one of the moments that made me kind of stand, like sitting down with Roger, and Roger looked at me and said, like, biology is just physics, and it's engineerable, and like that's someone who spent 30 plus years in the industry, one of the greatest drug discoverers of our time, and he's not saying that, we're going to figure out the code and completely simulate biology in the next 10 years. But I actually think we're on this path towards truly understanding and simulating how biology works. Those, one last thing, Zav, and then I'll shut up. But those crazy videos that you see, that these amazing kind of 3-dimensional kind of animations of how cell types work. You've got, actin walking along myosin and these things bubbling in and out. Like that's all sort of understood by structural biology that's been, built on the shoulders of giants, but like predicted, through specific sort of snapshots in time. Like I think we get to a world where that simulation and those animations are truly one-to-one, right? That's many, many sort of decades out. So it's not an interpretation, but actual sort of, real fact and understanding and a depth of like what's actually happening because you're seeing it live. Anyway, that was a little bit of a tangent. Go ahead, Zav.
I 100% agree with all 4 of the points that Adam mentioned. The Roger Icon example, I think, is relevant here, and that's one of the most kind of traditionalist, translators of science to medicine in the history of the industry, and he's leaning into this. The only way, if you have actually that scale of data, petabytes of data a week, if not day, the only way to make sense of that, it's high dimensional, it's multimodality, and it's large scale. You're not going to have any single human or any team of humans candidly be able to analyze that and decipher the signal from the noise and see the structure there. It has to be a machine at that scale. And as Adam mentioned, as the modern lab really does become the largest producer of data, of novel data on the planet today, the only way to kind of do that across the modalities and scales is to leverage something like it. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. It doesn't have to be LLMs or GANs or whatever. Even just simple data visualization and analysis goes a really long way. And you'd be surprised as to how many people are still reluctant to just accept and acknowledge that. The flip, and I think looking at the a lot of the work on large language models right now is you will always have folks who look at some of the results from LLMs, for example, And their first response is to scoff and say, but look, these things are what's colloquially referred to as hallucinating in these, in these edge cases, without accepting that, like, holy shit, your jaw should be on the floor. This thing's producing original content in a way that most people, if you didn't know, you would think it's a human and it's intelligent. It might, 1 out of every 10 times, two out of every 10 times, do something completely off the rails. And that's okay. You should acknowledge where technology's limitations are, but it's also totally okay to say, I don't think anybody expected that this would be possible 3 years
in general,
2 years ago.
In general, I find that the people who have their hands dirty using whatever technology it is are kind of well aware of what the limitations are, and they're kind of well aware of the fidelity of what they're doing. And at least from a biological standpoint, the arrow of progress is up and to the right? Like it is wherever it is now, but in general, biological data gets better over time. Like, the people genuinely recognize its limitations, and they work really diligently to make some of those go away. And ultimately, there's a stepwise thing where that progress gets better and better and better. So eventually,
we speak about this a lot with both our founders and our investors, which is that oftentimes the machine learning, the deep learning, whatever term du jour, that'll kind of grab the headlines, but underneath it, enabling it, the kind of foundational substrate for this entire regime change that we're witnessing right now is exactly that. It's every assay of merit in the wet lab today follows exponential or Moore's law like curves and cost and scale and fidelity and so on and so forth. And because of that, we're suddenly accessing historically intractably sized, intractably kind of levels of fidelity data in biology and chemistry that then you can port onto the rails that our peers in Silicon Valley have developed on the machine learning side.
Yeah. All right. So if we're talking about the next little bit, so what are some of the places where, do you guys ever find yourselves on an island, right? Do you find yourselves where you guys have conviction around something, but you look around and nobody else is there, right? And this is kind of one of those moments in time where if you are kind of ahead of the curve, like, you could kind of look around in the room and say, we really, really like this because X. And your syndicate folks could look around and just kind of say, yeah, we're not there yet. Have you ever found yourself in that kind of position yet?
All the time. Adam happens to be on Manhattan Island right now. It's
that's where we want to be. Like, I mean, you can't carry it all on itself. I think entrepreneurs should have the confidence in us with the fund size that we have, that we can truly back a company through the lifetime of its existence. But it also, I think Zav likes to say, it takes a village, right? And I will say that we have a number of strong other partners, investors, downstream capital that are really, really bullish on this space. And as long as there's a kind of a clear talk track and a vision and a mission that a company, like, great companies will always be funded. And we'll get things right, but we'll also get things wrong. But the island doesn't scare us. I mean, I think, the more and more that we're on an island where we see this enormous North Star in front of us, that excites us. And I think that's one of the things I'm excited about Nan and Zav is, like, we're those two are fearless, right? And so, like, you've got a conviction and a thesis, and you see amazing team entrepreneurs, you run after them.
I think if we do this right, over time, we build bridges from this island to all of the mainland categories. And allow people kind of two-way access in and out of the island. It's a little bit different than maybe growth software. That really is such an efficient market where any incremental edge or thesis you really want to keep proprietary internally within the four walls of your firm. We're in a position right now where it behooves us to evangelize and galvanize what we're doing and to educate the broader, not only entrepreneurial market, but then also the investor category as to how we're thinking about things and how we're underwriting the logic and the calculus that we are using. We won't not invest in a company because we're worried that we're on an island. If anything, I think we tend to, all three of us, Adam's uniquely brave and ferocious too. I think we lean into those moments. We also won't invest in a company if we don't understand what the future financing strategy is, right? So we won't put our capital and drive it off the bridge because something is exciting. We need to understand both sides. But the mere reality of being on an island, I think that's what draws the largest alpha, and it's going to put us in a position to have the greatest returns.
Yeah. I mean, you want to be the best at it, but ultimately you want other people around you too, because there needs to be kind of a kernel and a community there, because that's the way the pie gets the biggest.
That's right.
Before we talk about the New York ecosystem, this part of the conversation just had me thinking, how do you look at a startup's IP strategy? Because when I think about marrying, historical, therapeutic IP, the way, companies have used IP, and then the way tech has historically used IP, is it novel, and does it matter when you're looking at a company, what their IP strategy is?
I mean, the short answer is yes, and there's various flavors of IP. I would say, like, when we invest specifically in biotech, these platforms, like, we don't invest in the next, a company that's a single asset or dual assets, where I think chemistry and NCE and IP is like really, really important. But we invest in the embedders and the recursions of the world, where IP is really, really important from the output, the output of that platform. So I think with us, like, IP takes, 3 of our first 4 companies that, at Dimension are technology companies. One's an enterprise SaaS company called NewYorkBIOs. They're a New York-based company. You should have Bogdan and the team on to chat about what they're doing. They're an amazing company. Obviously biased. Another one is an open source software company, and then the third one is a computer vision machine learning company that's tapping in or selling into partners in the cell manufacturing space. So less of like hardcore IP and patents there.
Yeah.
Different modes. And again, that gets to the underlying sort of firm that we're building, which is a lot of the traditional life science firms just know, how do I think about IP and put it in that bucket there?
Yeah.
And don't understand or don't, haven't built out the muscle to sort of think through the other side of the coin.
Yeah.
Talk about New York.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do that. We got 7 minutes left. You guys are you've launched this new awesome firm in New York. You've got roots in New York. You've been a huge part of this community, right? And for the edification of the audience here, the reason that we have Calliope, this 100, 200 person company in New York, is because this young guy at Lux spent 3 years having coffee with Charles Zucker once a month to suss out this new entire big gut brain axis, which didn't evolve until much later. So it's because Adam basically put in years of work that this happened. So Adam, what's different now? Spoiler alert, it was him.
Look, Charles is an amazing human being, so who's now a dear friend, but those were real intellectual debates and battles early on.
I don't doubt it.
I have the ability to build really interesting companies here. We've built, I'd previously, Lux built a number, right? Like, so unfortunately lost one to Seattle, which is Cahal Neuroscience, but Ian Picon, who's one of the founders there, was a founding scientist at Calliope. And then I mentioned Colin before, we built V&V here, which was a gene delivery company that, we spun a technology out of, I was reading a Cell paper that was published out of Utah around this crazy kind of protein aggregation shuttling technology between neurons. And we built that here in New York before ultimately, merging it into what is now Era Therapeutics up in Boston. So I think the challenge continues to be real estate, commercial wet lab space, and the expense of that. But as you think about how we've just kind of viewed, shared how we view the world from a dimension standpoint, one of the amazing things that technology does is it democratizes the ability to build companies and virtualizes it. Again, I don't want to say we aim to invest in fully virtual distributed biotech companies, because you need that wet lab and that doing, experimentalizing, doing the research. But you can build a company that has, wet lab somewhere else and their engineering team here in New York, or vice versa. So
yeah,
Kaleidoscope Bio, which is building, the Notion for and GitHub for bio and R&D teams, is based here, right? And so I don't know, Zav, how do you think about New York?
I think New York is a draw for young, ambitious talent, and you have the tax of higher costs, and that's going to be the balance. And so clever ways to offset the tax, whether that's leaning into decentralizing the org or virtualizing certain aspects of it, where that's possible and where technology plays a role, that's great. But I think you're seeing it now more than ever, especially folks on the software side. I think they want to be in one of the large metropolis areas more often than not. And so that'll be a little bit of a competitive advantage for us. I think it's harder to convince people, increasingly so, to kind of pick up and move to South Jersey or Philly, South San Francisco, La Jolla.
What have you got against Philly? That's the second time.
Yeah, I know. Shots fired.
It's because the Eagles beat the 49ers, huh?
Yeah, that was low blow. But
this is the most sports centric conversation we've had on this program in a long
Well,
time.
we use a lot of sports analogies. I'm surprised Zav hasn't mentioned the Golden State Warriors yet, who he's number one fan of. Well, our former
very nervous for the second half of the season, but
yeah. Anyway, I think we want to ask another couple of questions, Derek, or do you want to?
Yeah. So I would just, looking forward, right? We know the challenges, right? They are not new challenges for New York. I do think that the prevalence of our academic institutions also really help, right, with creating an ecosystem of early stage potential scientists, right? But what do you see as, clearly you all, when you opened your own shop, decided to stay here. So what do you see as, over the next, say, 5 to 10 years, the biggest upside of New York for locating companies?
I will say, by the way, but Dimension is bi-coastal, so Nan is based in the area, and Zav and I are here. Go ahead, Zav.
There's I think we're on the precipice of these emerging mafias really kind of leaning into the space, and whether that's the first set of folks from Schrodinger leaving and starting new companies here in New York, or Calliope, or Hugging Face and starting a software kind of company in the biotech space. You have these really exceptional pools of talent and builders that, as Adam mentioned, maybe weren't even here 10 years ago, and who are here. They've seen the first innings, the existence proofs of building and scaling large, deeply technical franchises in New York. They're here now. And with that, I think, comes the experience and the pools of people who then want to go and do it again on their own. Yeah. And so I think it'll only compound. It'll be exponential in scale, and I think happen with increasing velocity.
And I think the other thing I'll say, like, technology is this unstoppable force. And so as you think about what the lab looks like in 10 or 20 years from now, we have this vision of, it's this kind of beautiful symphony and kind of dance between biologists and chemists and machines, right? And robots. New York, like that challenge of commercial lab space, I think, sort of goes away, right? It's beaten by technology. And as you put the lab anywhere, right? You could put it in Long Island City, it doesn't need to be in Manhattan. And you can run like Icon again, Recursion, like they're running experiments 24/7 with minimal human input. You need the humans to drive kind of the thesis and hypothesis and think about where you're going and so on and so forth. But I think that changes the ball game for building biotech companies in New York. And so that, it enables it even more so.
Yeah. I think you nailed it, right? Because as you said, like, we now have this first crop of companies that have been seeded and grown here. And now you've got like second generation folks that knows what it's like to be within a startup in New York, knows what it's like to build a team here. Right. So that's, like you said, like, one of the main variables is just time. And, through time, we're progressing and we're getting more as an ecosystem, and it's going to grow. So I always love the substrate here. Yep. And excited to have you guys drive and where the next wave is going to go.
More and more interviews for you to have as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
Never ending supply of guests.
So we're glad that 2/3 of your leadership team is on the East Coast. And we are also glad you probably didn't wake your co-founder up.
He's had many a 6 a.m. wake up. He's yeah, and he's the brightest and more sprightly of all of us. So anyway,
Good. Well, thank you so much for your time. I know this was, I learned a lot, and I know our audience did as well. So thanks everybody, and we'll see you next Tuesday morning at 9. All right. Take care.
Thank you, Jennifer and
Thanks,
Derek.
guys. Bye.
Bye.